Hey everyone, welcome back to another reflection on the day's Mass readings. Today is Saturday of week 20 in Ordinary Time, the memorial of Pope St. Pius X, who was a fantastic earlier 20th century Pope who chose to lower the age of reception for Holy Communion. So he allowed a lot more children to start receiving Holy Communion on a regular basis. My name's Clement Harold. I'm a recent graduate of Franciscan University, and I'm a new employee here at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Now, in today's reading, we're going to focus our attention on the Gospel reading, which comes from Matthew chapter 23. And this, I think, is a really powerful passage, and it's one which we would do really well to read and reflect on slowly and prayerfully. And there are, I think, a number of different messages to be detected within Christ's teaching here. Now, the first message that I see when I read this passage is just a simple warning against a sort of dangerous form of clericalism, a kind of clericalism where we as lay people might start to take the view that priests or bishops, or in Jesus' day, the Pharisees, are to be followed or imitated without question. And here Jesus is very careful to draw a distinction between doing as the Pharisees teach and doing as the Pharisees act. And in the same way in our own day, I think it's important that we place a premium on always remaining faithful sons and daughters of the church, even while acknowledging there might be situations where maybe there's corruption in the church, or maybe there's a priest or bishop doing things they shouldn't be doing. But even in those situations, Jesus reminds us that we need not imitate their example, but we still owe them our obedience when they're exercising their authority legitimately. So that's one lesson that I think we can garner from the reading for today. But a second, and I think more foundational lesson that we can draw from this passage from Matthew is about what I would call the primacy of humility and the role which this crucial virtue plays. It's something of a sine qua non in the Christian life. And Jesus' teaching for us in today's gospel is that we need to start taking this virtue much, much more seriously. Now, why is that? Well, I think the reason humility is so central in the life of a Christian is because all of the other virtues flow from it. And without humility, the fact is that we become just like the Pharisees, just like those hypocrites who are full of show but who lack love. Okay, so what is humility exactly? Humility, I think, is the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes of the Christian life. And Matthias Scheeben, the great 19th century German theologian, he described humility, together, interestingly, with the virtue of chastity, as the rarest and most beautiful blossoms of the tree of Christian grace. And outside the Christian world, he said, these are the least known and the least understood. And he goes on to add that the more than all the other virtues, humility and chastity are closely connected with all the mysteries of grace and supernatural love. And that, I think, is just a great thing to meditate on. And so in a word, I think we could say that humility is seeing things in perspective. It's humility which allows us to see God, see ourselves, see the world, see other people, all of these things exactly the way that they're supposed to be seen. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm reading the Gospels, there are times that I feel just a little bit sorry for the Pharisees. I mean, how exactly were the Pharisees supposed to know who Jesus was? Weren't they just trying to follow the law of Moses? Isn't Jesus kind of a bit harsh on them? Never mind John the Baptist, who calls them a brood of vipers. And these are great questions, I think, genuinely. But it's in passages like today's gospel passage that we get a better sense and a bigger picture of what's going on. And I think that bigger picture is the fact that the Pharisees are unable to understand who Jesus is precisely because they're unable to accept that he's the new and infinitely greater Moses, not because they're simple scholars who are just a little bit confused, but rather because they're full of pride, and their pride blinds them from the truth. And this is a sobering warning for us, because if we're not sure who Jesus is, and if we're misunderstanding him, then maybe we're suffering from that same thing, that same pride. And so I would say that the Pharisees are in critical need of what Stephen Covey described in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as a paradigm shift. Instead of seeking first to understand and then to be understood, the Pharisees' only objective is to see their own agenda succeed. And so what brings them to eventually despise Jesus so much is the way in which he challenges them to reevaluate their priorities and to start putting God instead of themselves at the center of their life. Now, because they haven't made this paradigm shift in their personal moral lives, they're simply incapable of changing the paradigm through which they should view Jesus and his teaching. They love to be seen, Jesus tells us. So their pride turns them inward, and the truth which Jesus brings is obscured by their own self-absorption, their own egocentricity. Lest we get too comfortable, however, I think we need to remind ourselves, not just today, but every day, that we too are full of pride. We too, as fallen human beings, so often lack that humility which would allow us to live out the poverty of spirit, which is the first and the foundational beatitude. And so with this in mind, I think it's worth asking ourselves, what can we do? What can I do to grow in this virtue, uncomfortable though that may be? And here I'm going to offer 5 simple observations, 5 practical steps. And so the first of these, very simple, is that we can practice obedience. And often obedience, we think of it as some high, lofty ideal, maybe for a religious or a priest. But I think obedience often is just doing our duty, maybe in the workplace, maybe with our studies, doing that, doing it well, and being faithful and obedient to that. And I think that's a great way to grow in humility. A second thing that we can do is we can accept humiliations when they come. And so I think we all in day-to-day life, we have those moments where something happens to us, maybe we do something clumsy, we feel a little bit stupid, and that can be tough to go through. But I think it's a really good habit when those moments occur in our lives, just to put on a good face, to smile, to laugh it off, and to offer it to the Lord, and to thank him for that gift of something humbling. A third thing that we can do, which I remember a priest telling me once, is to get better at doing good works in secret. And that's not easy, because I think we all have this desire when we do something good, do something charitable, to announce it or just to subtly bring it up so that people know it was us. But I think getting better at doing things outside of the sight of others so that we're not seeking the praise of others. And that's a great way to grow in humility. Fourth, we can reevaluate our self-worth in light of the love of the Father. And this is obviously a huge topic, a topic for another day, but I think practicing getting better at seeing ourselves not as other people see us, not even as we see ourselves, but as God sees us. And God sees us in our weakness and our frailty, but he also sees us for so much more than we would ever see ourselves. He loves us infinitely. And so in a strange way, a paradoxical way, even though we conflate ourselves in our mind, actually the love of God and the identification of God the Father is so much greater than anything that we can imagine. And finally, number 5, I'd say we can pray. We can pray for the grace for humility. Again, it's not easy to do that in a way that's sincere, but I think, as one of the saints would often say, fake it till you make it. And I think if we can just get better at making a daily habit of praying for humility, even if we don't feel like we mean it all that much, over time that becomes more and more our own. So in conclusion, as Catholic Christians, we need to daily remind ourselves of the necessity of humility. We need to remind ourselves that the Christian who lacks humility is like a marathon runner without water or a soldier without a weapon. And today's gospel reminds us as well of the interconnectedness of the Beatitudes, for it reveals how pride blinds us. And so in reality, it's not only the pure of heart who will see God, but also the poor in spirit. And so today, let us recommit ourselves to this poverty of spirit and make Christ's words our own when he tells us, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. This has been Clement Harold with the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Thank you so much for joining me.